Hey everyone, and welcome to the Rules of Thumb podcast with Dr. G. I'm your host, Nick Golinvaux, and I write a weekly newsletter on all things musculoskeletal health and longevity. That means fewer aches and pains and a better knowledge of what to actually do when they inevitably rear their ugly head. In this podcast, I will read to you my article of the week so that you can listen to it on the go. If video is more your thing, welcome to those of you watching on my YouTube channel. And as always, the original article with its associated images will be linked in the show notes below. So without further ado, let's get into this week's article titled, So You Broke Your Wrist, Now What? Today, I want to talk about wrist fractures, specifically the most common type of wrist fracture known as a distal radius fracture. The wrist is made up of 8 tiny little bones plus the distal end of your 2 forearm bones known as the radius and ulna. Distal means further away from the center of your body. While any of these bones can break, the distal end of your radius is the most frequently fractured bone after an impact on your hand or wrist. While the radius is actually a forearm bone, it commonly breaks near the junction between the forearm and the wrist. We call this the distal end of the bone, which is opposite of proximal, which is near your elbow. This is where the term distal radius fracture comes from. If you're following along in the article, you will see both front and side view x-rays of a normal wrist in the first image, followed by x-rays of a distal radius fracture in the second. Can you see the break? I've outlined it in yellow in case you didn't catch it. I often get the question, will my wrist fracture heal in a cast? Let's focus on 2 key concepts, displacement and angulation. Displacement refers to how far the broken bone ends have moved apart. Angulation refers to how far out of alignment they are. Understanding these 2 factors is crucial for analyzing wrist x-rays and determining the treatment that is most likely to succeed. Why do these matter? If your bones are too displaced, they may not heal properly on their own or in a cast. If they're too angled, they might heal crooked, leading to deformity, loss of movement, weakness, or arthritis. On the contrary, a bone that has broken without significant displacement or angulation may heal just fine with a few weeks in a cast. It really all is in the details of the fracture pattern. So which distal radius fractures benefit from surgery? Let's use the example of the fracture I outlined earlier in the article. In yellow, I outlined both the displacement and angulation in the figure. Notice that the broken bones have displaced enough to dramatically shrink the angle between the red lines and move the corner of the distal radius far below the corner of the distal ulna. And on the side view, you can see that the joint outlined in yellow is tipped backwards about 45 degrees. And as I mentioned above, displacement and angulation can lead to crooked bone healing, weakness, stiffness, and arthritis. Suffice it to say that if your x-rays look like those above, you will want to consider surgery to restore your normal anatomy as best as possible. So how is a distal radius fracture fixed surgically? I go into greater detail in a different in-depth article, but the basic answer is with a plate and screws. This is called open reduction internal fixation, or ORIF in the orthopedic world. Translation: open the skin, meaning surgery, reduce the fracture, which means put it back in alignment, and place something internally, meaning plates and screws, to fix it in place, ORIF. In the article, there is an x-ray of a distal radius fracture that has now been fixed with a plate and screws, and below that, I have redrawn the same displacement and angulation lines you will remember from the earlier x-rays. Notice how with surgery, I have increased the angle between the red lines back to normal, restored the relationship between the corner of the radius and the corner of the ulna, and put that darn joint back up on top where it belongs. The anatomy is restored. This stuff is just too cool. So some takeaways from today. Most of the time, the term wrist fracture refers to breaking the end of the forearm bone known as the radius, at the point just where it meets the wrist bones. Not all wrist fractures are created equal. Whether one would benefit from casting or surgery depends on the displacement and angulation of the broken bone ends. When they do need surgery, the goal of the procedure is to restore the normal anatomy as best as possible, typically by using plates and screws. So there you have it. Now you know a little more about wrist fractures, why we fix them, and how we fix them with surgery. While I hope you never experience any of the above, tuck this one away in case you or someone you know becomes one of the 15% of people who suffer from this injury at some point in their life. That's all we have for today. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time.